Some people carry wounds so deep that society calls them broken. But Carl Jung discovered something that changes everything. The universe doesn't choose damaged people by accident. It chooses them on purpose. And what happens to them next isn't what you think. Today, I'll show you why the most wounded individuals aren't mistakes of nature, but carefully selected carriers of something humanity desperately needs. Because what Jung found in his most private case files will make you see suffering in a completely different way. Jung spent decades studying patients who had been shattered by life, abused children who grew into anxious adults, people betrayed by those they trusted most, individuals who felt every emotion twice as deeply as everyone around them. These weren't his most successful patients, they were his most important ones. He noticed something strange. The people who suffered most also perceived most. They could read emotions other people missed. They sensed lies before words were spoken. They felt the pain in every room they entered. Jung called this differentiated perception, and he realized it wasn't a weakness, it was an advanced feature of consciousness. But here's what made Jung's hands shake as he wrote his notes. These highly perceptive people consistently ended up in the same situation, isolated from others, exhausted by what they saw, unable to maintain normal relationships, not because they were unstable, but because seeing everything came with a cost nobody understood. Jung documented case after case of empaths, sensitives, and wounded healers who possessed extraordinary abilities. They could predict relationship failures months before they happened. They knew when someone was lying just by watching their face. They absorbed the emotional atmosphere of entire groups without anyone speaking a word. Society told them they were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But Jung discovered the truth. They weren't broken by their sensitivity. They were being prepared for something the collective consciousness wasn't ready to understand yet. The universe chooses damaged people because damage creates cracks, and through those cracks, light enters in ways it never could through an unopened mind. Jung observed that trauma doesn't just hurt people, it opens them. It forces consciousness to expand beyond normal human limitations. When someone experiences deep suffering, their psyche must grow larger to contain that pain. This growth isn't comfortable. It tears them apart from the inside. But what emerges on the other side possesses abilities that protected people never develop. Jung wrote about what he called the wounded healer archetype. These are individuals whose own suffering becomes the source of their power to help others, not despite their wounds, but because of them. The universe doesn't make mistakes when it allows certain people to be damaged. It's creating specialists. Think about it this way. A person who has never known betrayal cannot spot a liar. Someone who has never felt depression cannot recognize it in others before it becomes dangerous. An individual who has never experienced abuse cannot sense the warning signs that save lives. The damaged person develops what Jung called shadow sight. They've been to the dark places that most people only fear. They know the terrain, they speak the language, and because of this, they can guide others through darkness in ways that comfortable people never could. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about why the universe chooses damaged people. It's not just about individual healing, it's about collective evolution. Damaged people serve as consciousness pioneers. They explore psychological territories that humanity will eventually need to navigate. Throughout history, the most transformative spiritual teachers, artists, and healers were deeply wounded individuals. They didn't succeed despite their damage. They succeeded because their damage gave them access to truths that protected people cannot see. Jung observed that damaged people perceive reality more accurately than those who have been sheltered. Comfortable people live in a filtered version of existence. They see what they want to see. They believe what they need to believe. Their psychology stays simple because it never has to handle complex darkness. Damaged people don't have that luxury. Life stripped away their comfortable illusions. They've seen behind the mask society wears. They know what humans are capable of when nobody is watching. This knowledge is terrible, but it's also truthful in ways that protected consciousness can never access. The universe needs people who can handle dark truths, because those truths don't disappear just because most people refuse to look at them. Someone has to carry the shadow contents that the collective consciousness cannot yet integrate. That job falls to the damaged ones. Jung documented what happens when damaged people refuse their calling, when they try to heal their wounds by becoming normal, when they attempt to unsee what they've seen and unfeel what they've felt. They become sick, not because something is wrong with them, but because they're resisting their purpose. The universe chose them as consciousness carriers. When they reject that role, their psyche rebels. Depression deepens, anxiety intensifies. Physical illness manifests, not as punishment, but as the psyche's way of saying you're not listening to what you're meant to become. Jung called this the individuation crisis. It's the moment when a damaged person must choose between staying broken or becoming integrated, between remaining a victim or transforming into a warrior, between seeing their wounds as curses or recognizing them as initiations into deeper consciousness. This choice is the most important moment in a damaged person's life, because what they decide determines not just their own future, but humanity's future. The universe needs them to choose transformation. Consciousness evolution depends on wounded individuals who learn to wield their damage as wisdom. But here's where it gets really intense. The transformation process isn't gentle. Jung observed that damaged people who choose integration go through what he called shadow integration under extreme duress. They must face everything that broke them, not to heal it in the traditional sense, but to alchemize it into something useful. They take their betrayal and transform it into the ability to spot manipulation before it hurts others. They take their depression and turn it into deep empathy for those struggling in darkness. They take their abuse and convert it into fierce protection of the vulnerable. Their wounds don't disappear. They become weapons. Jung wrote about patients who went through this transformation. They didn't become less sensitive. They became strategically sensitive. They didn't stop seeing darkness. They learned to work with it consciously. They didn't heal their damage. They integrated it into a complete self that could handle both light and shadow without being destroyed by either. These integrated, damaged people became what Jung called psychological warriors. Not aggressive or cruel, but powerful in ways that protected people could never understand. They possessed complete perception. They saw the full spectrum of human nature, and they could navigate that complexity without losing themselves. The universe chooses damaged people because it needs these warriors. Collective consciousness is evolving, and that evolution requires individuals who have been to hell and learned how to navigate it consciously. People who can hold both beauty and horror without denying either. Humans who have suffered enough to develop real compassion instead of the shallow sympathy that protected people offer. Jung observed that society fears damaged people who complete their transformation. Because these individuals can no longer be manipulated, they see through every social game. They recognize emotional predators instantly. They refuse to participate in collective delusions. Their presence alone disrupts the comfortable lies that groups need to function. This is why damaged people often end up isolated, not because they're doing something wrong, but because their consciousness threatens the collective agreement to stay comfortably unconscious. The universe chose them to be disruptors, to be the ones who cannot unsee what needs to be seen, to be the ones who make everyone else uncomfortable by existing authentically. But isolation isn't the end of their story. Jung discovered that damaged people who complete their integration eventually find their tribe. They connect with other consciousness warriors who have been through the same transformation. These connections are rare but profound. Finally, they meet people who can handle their full presence without fear. The universe doesn't just damage people and abandon them. It damages them, transforms them, and then connects them with others who can help carry the work of conscious evolution. These networks of integrated damaged people become what Jung called culture carriers. They hold consciousness that the collective isn't ready for yet, keeping it alive until humanity catches up. Think about every major shift in human awareness. Behind it, you'll find damaged individuals who refuse to stay broken, spiritual teachers who transformed their suffering into wisdom, artists who alchemized their pain into beauty that wakes people up, healers who turned their wounds into medicine for others. The universe chooses damaged people because only damage creates the depth required for this work. Comfortable people stay on the surface. They have no reason to dive deep into consciousness. But damaged people have no choice. Life pushed them into the abyss, and in that abyss, they discover capacities that surface dwellers never develop. Jung emphasized that this isn't about glorifying suffering. The universe doesn't damage people because it's cruel. It allows damage because consciousness evolution requires it. Someone must explore the dark territories of human experience. Someone must learn to integrate shadow at a level the collective hasn't reached yet. That someone is always a damaged person. But here's the crucial part Jung emphasized. Being chosen doesn't mean you'll succeed. Many damaged people never complete their transformation. They stay stuck in victim consciousness. They let their wounds define them rather than refining them. They refuse the call to integrate their shadow and instead project it onto everyone around them. The universe can choose you, but you still have to choose back. You have to decide that your damage will become your deepest strength rather than your permanent limitation. You have to transform your wounds from something that happened to you into something that prepared you for a consciousness that most people will never reach. Jung documented the signs of successful transformation. Damaged people who integrate their shadow stop blaming others for their pain, not because others weren't responsible, but because blame keeps you stuck in the past. They take radical responsibility for their healing, even though they didn't cause their damage. They develop what Jung called conscious participation in suffering. Instead of being unconscious victims of their wounds, they become conscious alchemists of their pain. They study their damage like scientists study phenomena. They learn from it. They extract wisdom from it. They use it to understand human nature at depths that protected people cannot access. They stop trying to become normal and start embracing their difference. They recognize that their sensitivity isn't a disorder to be cured, but a capability to be honed. They understand that their ability to see darkness makes them valuable, not damaged. They wear their wounds as badges of consciousness rather than marks of shame. Jung observed that transformed, damaged people develop extraordinary discernment. They can tell within minutes whether someone is safe or dangerous. They sense manipulation before it fully forms. They recognize emotional predators who fool everyone else. Their damage gave them pattern recognition that saves lives. They become protectors of the vulnerable because they remember what it's like to be helpless. They spot abuse that others miss because they've lived it. They create safety for people who have none because they know what that absence feels like. Their damage transforms into fierce love for those who suffer, but they also develop ruthless boundaries. They've learned that not everyone deserves access to their gifts. They protect their energy like the precious resource it is. They say no without guilt to people and situations that drain them. Their damage taught them that self-sacrifice isn't noble when it destroys you. The universe chooses damaged people and then watches to see if they'll choose themselves back. Will they integrate their shadow or project it? Will they transform their wounds into wisdom or weaponize them against others? Will they use their perception to heal or to harm? Jung emphasized that this choice determines everything. Damaged people who integrate their shadow become the most powerful forces for good in human society, but damaged people who refuse integration become the most dangerous forces for harm. The same deep perception that can heal can also destroy, depending on whether it's wielded consciously or unconsciously. This is why the universe doesn't choose everyone to be damaged. Not everyone can handle the responsibility that comes with deep wounds and expanded consciousness. The universe selects individuals whose souls are strong enough to transform damage into wisdom, rather than letting damage transform them into perpetrators. If you're reading this and recognize yourself as one of the damaged ones, Jung's message to you is clear. Your wounds aren't mistakes. They're initiations. You weren't broken by life. You were broken open. The cracks in your psyche aren't weaknesses. They're the places where light enters and new consciousness emerges. You weren't chosen to be damaged because the universe is cruel. You were chosen because your soul is strong enough to handle what will break weaker people. You were selected to carry consciousness that the collective isn't ready for yet. You were picked to be a pioneer in psychological territories that humanity must eventually explore. Your job isn't to heal until you're normal. Your job is to integrate until you're complete, to take every wound and extract its wisdom, to transform every betrayal into discernment, to alchemize every moment of suffering into deep compassion for others who suffer, to become so whole that you can hold both light and shadow without being destroyed by either. Jung spent his life studying damaged people who completed this transformation. He documented their journey from victim to warrior, from broken to integrated, from wounded to healing, and what he discovered should give every damaged person hope. The transformation is possible. The wounds can become wisdom. The damage can become your deepest strength. The universe doesn't choose damaged people by accident. It chooses them with precision. Because only damaged people develop the depth, perception, and power required to carry consciousness forward. Only wounded healers can guide others through darkness they've navigated themselves. Only those who've been broken can become truly whole. Your damage isn't your weakness. It's your initiation into a consciousness most people never reach. The universe chose you because you're strong enough to handle it. Now the question is whether you'll choose to transform it into the gift it was always meant to become. The choice is yours. But the universe is waiting to see if you'll become who your wounds prepared you to be. If you recognize yourself in this description of damaged people chosen by the universe, share your experience in the comments. Your story might be exactly what another wounded soul needs to hear to keep choosing transformation. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology that reveal the hidden purpose behind human suffering. If you're ready to explore how consciousness evolves through damage and integration, check out my video on the day the empath snaps, where I reveal Jung's most terrifying case about what happens when damaged people finally transform their wounds into power. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.